A warm good morning to one and all present here. The Chairman, Open Defense and Viva OC Examination Board, Professor K.B. Kembagowde, Professor K.C. Sunny, former Vice Chancellor of NUALS, presently Senior Professor in Central University of Kerala, Registrar Asha Ma'am, Special Officer Mahadevan Sir, Finance Officer Arun Sir, and other statutory officers, invited guests, research committee members, research advisory committee members, other faculty members, non-teaching staff of NUALS, research scholars, and the PG students of NUALS. We are assembled here to listen and participate in open defense presentation and Viva OC of Mr. VISHNU NAIR. He has submitted his research work on self-determination, the transformation of the right to self-determination, a critical analysis. This is the first presentation at the 2016 Revelations of NUALS. For that, we are fortunate to have here Professor K.B. Kembagowde, Principal, Vivekananda Law College. Sir is an expert in constitutional law and administrative law, and Sir has more than 30 years of teaching experience. Sir has taken his PhD from Mysore University, delivered lectures as a resource person in many universities all across India, and presently Sir is Academic Council and Syndicate member of Karnataka State Law University. We are honored to have you here, Sir. Welcome you, Sir. We have Professor Sunny, former Vice Chancellor of NUALS here. Sir needs no introduction. Sir has been always a constant support at all stages of VISHNU's research work, and we know the Sir's efforts to strengthen the research community and research work in NUALS. So proudly we welcome you, Sir. Professor M.C. Walson and other faculty members of NUALS, I welcome each one of you. And in the invited guests, family members of VISHNU NAIR are here. I welcome each one of you to this gathering. And Research Advisory Committee member Anil Sir and Research Committee member Professor Balakrishnan Sir yet to join. They will also come. So I invite them in their absence. And I acknowledge the support of research scholars of NUALS in completion of the work of Mr. VISHNU. So I welcome each one of you to this gathering, and the PG students and integrated LLM PG students also, PhD students also to this gathering. So VISHNU has taken a topic of international relevance. I have to appreciate and acknowledge the efforts he has taken. He has visited almost all libraries all across India, and he stayed in many places and interacted with the many international law experts. And then, being it an international topic, he wanted to get some kind of validation from international community. So he visited foreign universities, and he was a visiting scholar in Aberdeen University under Professor Sere. And we also have fortunate to have the result of that. Sere has come here and offered a certificate course to NUALS students. And in all his the period of research, he has put maximum effort to complete his research work. And as a constant support, Anuradha was always there to support him in his this journey. VISHNU simply say, okay, we are going to Delhi. Immediately the bag will be packed and ready. You are Delhi or Bangalore or even to Aberdeen, right? So constant support. So I have to acknowledge that legally 2 persons. I welcome Anuradha especially to this gathering. So with this small introduction, I proudly invite Mr. VISHNU NAIR to present his research work and then defend his thesis. Welcome, VISHNU.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, respected teachers, fellow research scholars, family and friends who have gathered here. LLM students are sitting in the smart classroom on the other side of the building. I'm very happy to see that you're all here to be present while I defend my thesis. But I'll save my words of gratitude to the end of my presentation, and I shall just go directly to my topic, that is transformation of right to self-determination, a critical analysis. So, I wanted to start today's presentation with a quote. Standing on the moon, watching the earth from a different perspective, one sees water and land. And if one would take a closer look, one might see mountains, rivers, forests, and deserts. If one would get even closer to the surface of the earth, one would be able to distinguish cities, lakes, and roads. One would, however, search in vain if one would wish to identify a state. The reason why I started with this quote is because state is a man-made concept, a fictitious concept but a legal concept. And the concept of state is something that has always intrigued me. Since I decided to take up a career in law, and once I came across the subject of international law, I've been reading extensively on the various important aspects of international law, and state was one key area that was always fascinating, especially with respect to recognition of states, formation of states, secession of states. So, in the process of reading more and more about what state is, I came across this very important term very frequently. It's called self-determination. This particular term was constantly repeated in most articles that I come across. So I wondered what this is about. So self-determination or right to self-determination, most of you sitting here might already know what it is, but nonetheless, for those of you who are not aware, right to self-determination refers to the right of the people to freely determine their political, social, and cultural status freely. Basically, it is a right given to the people to decide how to be governed by who to be governed by, and what kind of governance they have to be subjected to. Now, this particular concept of self-determination was originally developed from a political concept. During the American Revolution, the French Revolution in the late 18th century, popular sovereignty, nationalisms were important notions that were advocated, and people started realizing they no longer want to be subject to alien subjugation. They wanted to become independent. They wanted to be democratic. So this notions of liberalism, popular sovereignty, fueled the political conception of the concept which is known as self-determination. There were a lot of advocates in favor of making or understanding or accepting it as a legal right. But it was only after the Second World War, once the United Nations Charter was established, that right to self-determination was accepted as a legal right. Now, the intention behind accepting right to self-determination as a legal right was to usher in the process of decolonization, which was a prevalent evil during that time. Now, there were many colonial territories under control by various major powers, and in order to give independence or some kind of autonomy to them, the United Nations decided to incorporate this right to self-determination as a means of achieving this objective. But the problem here, or the crux problem that I realize, is that the wordings of what is included in the UN Charter as regards to what right to self-determination is, it does not restrict the term people to colonial bondage alone. That is, nowhere in the UN Charter nor in the subsequent human rights instruments does it say that only people belonging to colonial territories or colonial occupation can exercise this right. So in such an event, the question that arises now is, once a state is established, once a state is a sovereign state, enjoying its independence and its territorial integrity are all important principles which I'll be discussing later on in my presentation. Once it is established, does this right still persist outside the colonial context? So this ambiguity or conflict with respect to the application of right to self-determination is where my research journey began. So at this point of time, after extensively going through various materials, I realized that there is one primary question that I had to focus on, and there were 4 sub-questions to basically find the answer to. The primary question being whether the right to self-determination is transformed beyond its colonial approach. And the 4 sub-questions being whether there exists a right to unilateral self-determination outside the colonial context, whether there exists a right to secede in exercise of right to self-determination, whether right to self-determination includes the right to remedial right to secession, and last, whether right to self-determination be negotiated or consensually achieved. That is one final question, is where I contribute most of my research effort into developing a new concept. The first three questions, so I've structured my thesis in a way to answer these four sub-questions to the primary question. Now, starting off my research, the first chapter, I deal with the introduction and the research objective, research questions, the hypothesis, everything is there. But in my second chapter, I start with the evolution of the concept of right to self-determination by focusing on the origin of the concept itself. As I said in the beginning of my presentation, it was originally a political concept. The American Revolution in 1774 and the French Revolution in 1789 were instrumental in propagating this right as a political concept in light of liberalization, political and popular sovereignty, which was very important during that era. People wanted to govern themselves. State creation was to be given to the people. These notions fueled this concept further ahead, but never at any point of time during the 18th or 19th century did a legal right or legal character to this concept manifest. But interestingly, there were two important political thinkers during a time, Woodrow Wilson and Vladimir Lenin. Both of them had very distinct, strong opinion on what the right to self-determination is, though they both come from two different political ideologies. One coming from a more liberal Western democratic thinking and the other coming from a socialist background. Both of them strongly advocated the right to self-determination is an imperative right. It has to be recognized by international law and no longer is a political concept that we can merely discuss. So at the end of the First World War, both of these important philosophers had strongly advocated to include this as a legal right. And Vladimir Lenin, I would say that he took a very aggressive approach in tune with the socialist ideologies to promote aggressive application of self-determination to secession, free access to economic resources, while Woodrow Wilson was more on a liberal thinking where he advocated of the fact that a state which is democratically functioning satisfies the test of self-determination. Now, interestingly, what happened was, after the First World War, though the US had proposed to include self-determination as a legal right in the League of Nations covenants, it did not feature in the covenants. It was not included as a legal right. So after the First World War, though there were a lot of advocates to the right, there was no conversion or transformation right to a legal concept. Now, the reason being, as one of the secretaries of state of the US had pointed out, it is a word loaded dynamite. The word itself is loaded. It's not easy. It's very dangerous. You never know how it can affect the entire world system. So I think that must be the reason why they were reluctant at that point of time. But nonetheless, there was a case after the First World War, while the League of Nations, which is a predecessor to the United Nations, was in existence. There was a case called as Island Islands case. It's a very interesting case where 300 islands belonging to Finland wanted to secede from Finland and be part of Sweden, because most of the population belonged to the Swedish language speaking Swedish culture, because Sweden and Finland were originally together and they had then separated prior to the First World War. So they had put in an application to secede and join Sweden. But an application was made to the League of Nations. The League of Nations presented before the Permanent Court of Justice, which is the predecessor to the International Court of Justice, which we have currently. And they had referred the matter to a commission of jurists as well as a committee of rapporteurs, where an opinion was actually promulgated. Though there is no legal right per se as regards to self-determination at that point of time, this is I'm talking about 1920. At that point of time, the concept or the conceptual political concept of self-determination is definitely something that is there, but the people of Island Islands were not subjected or denied of their autonomy or not denied of they were not subjected to any kind of harassment as such, and therefore there was no requirement to consider self-determination as regards to the people of Ireland. They failed in their attempt to secede, but nonetheless that case was vital because it started the jurisprudential evolution of this concept of self-determination by a group of people discussing and trying to incorporate as a legal right. But after many years, after the League of Nations was established, the mandate system was also there. But nonetheless, we all know that Second World War did happen. And once the Second World War happened, the world community understood it's no longer, the way they decided to run the world was not effective. They needed a better, stronger international system. And that's how the United Nations came into picture. And that's how the International Court of Justice and all associated international law that we see now came into existence. But at that point of time, the member nations realized that international law needs to recognize self-determination as a legal right, and therefore the first article of the UN Charter in 1945 incorporated self-determination as a legal right to be given to the people and does not specify whether it's colonial or otherwise. So second chapter I conclude with that point where mostly I focus on the evolution from the political concept, the views of different scholars. Allen Island's case is something that I discuss. In my third chapter I move on to the point of where it transformed to a legal right. That is, when the United Nations incorporated into its charter, it became a legal right. Now the question now we have to answer is, what was the intention? Now many people were of the view that the intention was only to promote decolonization. So there were a lot of colonial territories, and in order to achieve this objective, self-determination was the best tool. And yes, it was indeed a best tool. But then again, it was not something that was restricted to colonial territories alone. In 1960, a decade later, there was a resolution passed by the United Nations with respect to granting of independence to colonial territories, which is considered to be the Magna Carta of decolonization, which is in tune with this principle of self-determination, also promoted this legal right further. And many countries, more than 80 colonial territories, had attained independence. Now, international law, the UN Charter specifically in its articles itself also advocate and strongly emphasize that territorial integrity is an important principle. That is, once a state is established, sovereignty is also there. A state is bound to be protected under the principle of territorial integrity. That is, nobody can violate my territorial borders. No part of my territory can be seceded, no part of my territory can be violated. Non-interference is a very important principle of international law. So as long as these concepts are there, how can self-determination exist? Because exercise of self-determination could and always might possibly result in secession or creation of a new state. So outside the colonial context, how does it evolve? This is where my next evolution or next transformation of the right to self-determination comes into picture. So the third chapter I focus on the UN aspect, focus on the just ergo omnes obligations and the two types of self-determination that was discussed as external and internal. External meaning creation of new states through secession, and internal meaning further autonomy within the existing structure, that is without creation of new state. But it is from the fourth chapter, particularly from the fourth chapter, that I discuss about the transformation. Now, what happened later on is, in 1966, the Human Rights Covenants were adopted. The Human Rights Covenants, as we know, the International Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR and ICSCR, so economic and social rights, both these important human rights instruments were instrumental in helping the transformation of right to self-determination from a colonial context to a human rights concept. So because of incorporation, adoption of this principle into the human rights covenants, there was a transfer of nature of right to self-determination from a colonial bondage to a human rights perspective. Now, why was this transformation required? Because there were a lot of territories which have been established which are being subjected to gross human right violations, and the necessity to recognize or protect these states and give them the opportunity to declare or decide as to how they wanted to be governed was a necessity. This is where I mostly go into my case studies. I have a lot of case studies in my fourth and fifth and sixth chapter. Now, a common question or common doubt that people listen to this, people would have is, outside the colonial context, has there not been any state that has been established? Has there been no state that is wrong? There has been states. Of the slide that I'm showing you, these are the states that have been accepted into the United Nations and have attained independence outside the colonial context. That is, assuming that territorial integrity is a vital principle of international law, nonetheless, these states did achieve independence and become an independent state. Now, the interesting case study, I'm not going on to all the aspects, all the case studies, but Bangladesh is one example that I've extensively written in my chapter 4. Now, Bangladesh was formerly known as East Pakistan, and it was part of Pakistan, and in 1971 there was an election in East Pakistan which was won by the Awami League, which was not in favor of the military regime in Pakistan, which tried to denounce the election of the Awami League and tried to suppress it. The Awami League tried to oppose, the people of East Pakistan opposed, but they started bombing cities, they started killing people, there were a lot of refugee crises. The entire area, the entire region was in complete chaos. India had intervened, India declared war and India had intervened. India had tried to involve itself and tried to get independence to the region. East Pakistan, Awami League with its leadership declared independence in 1971. The international community supported the independence. But interesting point being, Pakistan did not recognize the independence till 74. So though Bangladesh, that is what we call today, though East Pakistan had declared independence in 71, it was not until Pakistan had officially recognized Bangladesh as an entity did the United Nations come and say, okay, now you can get a membership. The point being that the approval of the parent state is a very important component in a non-colonial context. That is, even if states unilaterally attempt to secede and become independent, unless the parent state approves the secession or the creation of the new state, international law is very reluctant, or international community is very reluctant to recognize these entities. Bangladesh is a very key example of remedial right to secession, that being the key term in this chapter, because remedial right to secession basically means if a state violates human rights of the people, the state does not have the right to protect itself or shield itself on the basis of territorial integrity. So, a state which is in compliance with international law, a state which is in compliance with human rights obligations, they are protected under the principle of territorial integrity. If they are not, then right to self-determination definitely comes into play. Now, another interesting case study is Eritrea. Now, Eritrea was a former colony of Italy, then subsequently British had taken over. Eritrea, once it got independence in 1952, it was loosely federated with Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia had an emperor at that point of time, and the understanding was they would be a federation, they would independently govern, extent of autonomy was given to Eritrea. But the emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, I'm sorry if the pronunciation is wrong, he was not conducive, he was not open to the fact that Eritrea was still enjoying some autonomy. He slowly started reducing it, and unilaterally, after 10 years, in 1962, he annexed Eritrea and dissolved the federation. This forceful annexation of Eritrea led to a lot of chaos and revolt, and the Eritrean Liberation Army fought the war for many years. There was an insurgent group in Ethiopia also, which, with the support of the Eritrean army, had fought the forces of Ethiopia. And after many years, in 92, a new regime had come into picture, and they were more open to giving a referendum to Eritrea to decide for themselves whether they wanted to be part of Ethiopian Federation or not, and the people resoundingly voted in favor of becoming independent. And it was in 93 that Eritrea was admitted to the United Nations after a referendum was conducted and Ethiopia had accepted or approved to the independence of Eritrea. East Timor is another interesting case study that I have marked. Now, East Timor is actually was originally a Portuguese colony, and when Portugal had retrieved from its occupation in 1972, what happened was Indonesia had forcibly annexed the territory, and Indonesia were the de facto controlling authority in East Timor, while Portugal remained as a de jure control. But the problem arose in this particular matter is when Australia had concluded an East Timor Gap Treaty with Indonesia. By doing that, they implicitly agreed to the annexation as being legal. So Australia, by entering into a treaty with respect to certain natural resources off the coast of East Timor, which has come within the domain of East Timor continental shelf, they have implicitly as well as explicitly accepted to the jurisdiction or the power of Indonesia over the territory, though it was under dispute. So Portugal had approached the International Court of Justice and filed an application, and immediately Australia had appeared before the forum, but the International Court could not pass a judgment because Indonesia was not a party to the dispute. The third party doctrine played into the picture. But nonetheless, the ICJ had propounded certain important advisory opinions in the matter, and the court said that the East Timorians had a legal right to self-determination that was being denied, and the people have to be given a chance to vote and decide for themselves. Effectively result in independence to East Timor then. Subsequently, United Nations played a larger role by negotiating a kind of settlement where Indonesia, after a lot of human rights violations in East Timor, decided to offer a referendum to the people of East Timor to decide there whether they wanted to be part of Indonesia or independent. But then what happened was The referendum was in resounding favor of becoming independent. Indonesia did not expect that. And they tried to denounce the outcome of the referendum, but the United Nations immediately intervened, said it was legal, and they had a mission there. And subsequently in 2002, East Timor became an independent state. South Sudan is also another interesting example. We can always quote. Slightly different, it's the more latest state that has been admitted in the United Nations. South Sudan, predominantly South Sudan, were ethnically black Christian population, whereas the original Sudan, or northern Sudan, if I may say, was more of an Arab descent, and it was two territories that are culturally very different, religiously very different. They were not supposed to be joined together, but the world powers decided they had to be together, and finally, after a long struggle, they were able to attain independence. These case studies have a significant impact on my chapter 4 and chapter 5, because it basically talks about circumstances when states are created outside the colonial context in the context of remedial right to secession or the human rights aspect of self-determination. But the problem here, or the ambiguity here with respect to its interpretation is, I cannot say that this is the rule, or this is the law, or this is the system. That is, if there is human right violation, this is the outcome. You will have an independent state. No, because there is no uniformity in practice. These examples that I just mentioned are successful cases. There are even more unsuccessful cases of self-determination all over the world which are currently going on and currently in dispute. The ones I marked, it's 2 colors does not mean anything. Just for clarity, I've just put it in 2 colors. Kosovo, Chechnya, Biafra, Kashmir are all very interesting from an academic point of view, but the situation there is not that interesting. But the situations there definitely have warranted the intervention of United Nations and many a times, and they all have legitimate claims of self-determination, legitimate claims of independence, but they have not attained independence so far. I'll just focus on a couple of examples in this slide. Kosovo. Now, Kosovo is an autonomous province of former Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. At the time of dissolution, Kosovo was part of the Serbian Republic, and Serbia was not willing to give independence to Kosovo, though it was autonomous in nature. They had unilaterally taken away the autonomous status after Milosevic, the leader of Serbian, had come into power. He wanted to create a dominant Yugoslavian republic. So Serbian dominance was something that he had envisioned. And as a result, dissolution happened. But he was very firm on Kosovo not getting independence and ethnic cleansing, while the killing of many Albanians, Kosovo is majoritively the national group were Albanians, and he killed massive groups of people. The level of atrocities in Kosovo reached an epitome in 1999 that even the NATO had to intervene and bomb Serbia to stop the human rights violation in Kosovo. Subsequently, United Nations had established a mission in Kosovo, and after many years in 2016, while it was under UN administration, the Kosovo had formulated a constitution. They declared independence on a referendum saying that Kosovo is an independent state from 2006. But the problem is, Serbia has not yet recognized or accepted this declaration of independence, and therefore United Nations have not yet given independent status, not accepted it into its foray. Now, Kosovo is a prime example of gross human rights violations, squarely coming within the concept of remedial right to secession, but denied. Now, 117 countries recognize Kosovo as an independent state, yet United Nations is yet to offer membership just because the parent state opposes it. Now, Chechnya was an autonomous province within Russia. The Chechen Wars was a famous, while I was doing my graduation, I've read about Chechen Wars. Chechnya wanted to become independent from Russia. They were part of the Soviet Union disintegrated, Russia came into picture. They tried to declare independence and they've been denied it. War has happened. Initially they won, the state failed, Russia came back. There's a huge history there, and even today Chechnya is not an independent state. Kashmir, right in our own doorstep. We all know what happened in Kashmir, not from a political angle, from a legal perspective. Now, when Kashmir had decided to Kashmir was never part of India. It had Hari Singh was the ruler of Kashmir. And when India became independent, an accession agreement was signed because of the fact that Kashmir was not able to protect itself from the insurgent groups from all over. So the ruler of Kashmir decided to join India on certain conditions, and that is how the special status came into picture. Now, when the ruler had decided to join India as per the Ascension Agreement, the wishes of the people were never consulted. He was a Hindu ruler ruling a Muslim kingdom. And the people were not of the opinion of, no opinion of the people were actually accepted or even checked. So when India had included Kashmir within its territory, a promise was given to the people of Kashmir that a referendum would be conducted in Kashmir. Now, on a legal plane, I would argue that right to self-determination is denied to the people of Kashmir. But the problem here is that over the course of time, what happened in Kashmir, there are three interested parties. India is one, Pakistan is another, and China is. There's a Pakistan occupied Kashmir, China occupied Kashmir, and India occupied Kashmir. Since there are three intervening interests in that area, conducting a referendum, getting a free, fair outcome to an election in that region is not something that we can assume would be legal. So I'm not critically saying that the action of the Indian government of taking away the special status was right or wrong, not going into that aspect, but maybe there wasn't any other solution. But on an international level, on an international law perspective, there has been a denial of right to self-determination. Tamil Illam, they have no relevance whatsoever as they've been mostly eradicated, but they had a legitimate claim as far as, similar to what you think about in East Pakistan, they had a legitimate claim for self-determination. They were completely ousted from Sri Lanka. Somaliland. Now, interesting point with respect to Somaliland is that Somaliland has been functioning as an independent state for over 30 years, but none of the international community has recognized it and they don't care. Technically, I believe they don't care because Somaliland, when they got independence, they were they did not per se accept to it. They had been incorporated into the greater Somalia, but they understood that it was not productive to them and they decided to become independent. But none of the world community, none of the countries recognize Somaliland as an independent state. As per international law, under the Montevideo Convention, there are two theories of recognition. One is a declarative theory and the constitutive theory. One theory which says that if you have a definite territory, definite population, capacity to enter into relations, you are a state. But another theory says you need recognition. Now, Somaliland satisfies all the important theories with respect to population, territory, capacity to enter, and it is on paper a legitimate state. But because of the fact that Somaliland is not recognized by any other state members, it is not given United Nations membership, and it's still not considered as a state. Interestingly, Somaliland is recognized by Taiwan and Taiwan recognizes Somalia. They have decided to recognize each other because both of them don't have international recognition whatsoever. Kurdistan is another. 2007, they conducted a referendum north of Iraq. They declared independence. Nobody is even looking at them. They've just tried to avoid even considering the situation in Kurd. Republika Srpska is an autonomous province within the Bosnia-Herzegovina territory. They have actually attained a large degree of autonomy. They are mostly a Serbian populated autonomous region and they have actually successfully been able to achieve greater autonomy as compared to the other examples. Catalonia is another important case study that I have discussed in chapter 5. As well as 6, because Catalonia, there was a unilateral declaration of independence and there was a referendum which was conducted not legally. As soon as the referendum was in favor of secession, the Spanish government denounced the referendum and imprisoned all the people involved, and they are still being persecuted. So complete situation, Catalonia is in complete distress. So Catalonia is a current issue that is still going on. I know I'm just trying to keep within the time and quickly going over the case studies and not going in detail to each. Tibet, I had a suggestion in my pre-submission to include Tibet as one of my case studies, and I did. Anil sir and particularly point out Tibet as an issue to be included. I have definitely I have read about it because Tibet is still not an independent state. It's not considered as an independent state. It's still part of China, and Tibet is an important topic that I've included. Yes, now I've talked about the Kashmir struggle and yes, so chapter 4 and 5 I mostly focus on remedial right to self-determination, focus on the Chechenian crisis. One important case study I might have left out, I've included in the slide, which I can mention quickly, is Crimea. Now the reason I focus on Crimea now is it's a recent issue and a recent crisis, Ukraine war. Now what is happening in the world arena now is Russia has declared war against Ukraine, people are dying, there's a huge war happening. Everybody, the narrative that is there in media is that Russia had decided one day to invade into Ukraine. But that is not the truth. When the Soviet Union had disintegrated and Ukraine had become an independent territory, Crimea was part of Ukraine. It was originally gifted to Ukraine in 1952 as an autonomous province, and once Ukraine established, Crimea was given an autonomous status after a point of time, and they were happily, successfully existing within as an autonomous province within Ukraine itself. But the Russian government, there was a pro-Russian government in Ukraine, which was existence, which was toppled by a pro-American government at a later point of time, after which Russia wanted to stop this kind of change in attitude towards her because there was an interest in joining NATO. Now, Russia was vehemently against Ukraine joining NATO because it would lead the NATO members. There's a possibility that US can put its missiles on the border of Russia, which is a legitimate worry that Russians could have. As a warning in 2014, Russia had decided to invade Crimea, but instead of invading, the majority of the people in Crimea were Russian-speaking population, and they invaded Crimea. That's a peninsula part of Ukraine. They conducted a referendum in Crimea and became independent, and Crimea decided to join Russia based on the referendum. All happened in 2014. So the war that we see today is not a crisis or conflict which happened in the last 3-4 years. It is something that's been going on since 92 and mostly escalated in 2014. Now, because Ukraine was not willing to down their ambition of joining NATO, the war was declared. I'm not saying it is right or wrong, but the point being that narrative part of that point, that aspect of the facts are mostly neglected in media. So, Crimea is a territory which had declared independence and accepted by Russia, but currently it's not given an independent status because it's not recognized by US and other territories, other states in the United Nations. So, while I was researching these things and understanding how this transformation has happened from a colonial to a historic to a remedial right, I realized that in the 21st century, it has to further evolve. It has to further transform. I'm not saying that remedial right has become the go-to solution to all cases. As I just mentioned, it is inconsistent. But one particular case study that basically brought about an interest in me while I was choosing my PhD topic was the referendum which happened in Scotland. The reason I focus on Scotland is because Scotland is a situation wherein Scotland did not want to be part of the United Kingdom. They had been fighting for independence for many years without any as such bloodshed. There's no human right violation there. United Kingdom, part England, Wales, and England was willing to negotiate with Scotland and offer a referendum to them to decide for themselves whether they want to be part of UK or not. The act of even negotiating and giving it voluntarily to a group of people to decide, that is what is a negotiated right to self-determination, and that is a concept that has a huge research gap. There is not a lot of materials, there is not a lot of study with respect to negotiated right to self-determination. And my chapter 6, the primary chapter which according to me, I focus on this concept of negotiating the right to self-determination. That is, I believe that in the 21st century, the traditional state borders or traditional concept of statehood have changed. Technology has brought the world closer. Now we are living in a technologically advanced state, and we have to be open to the idea that if a group of people legitimately has a concern to voice their concern with respect to the way it is governed, at least an opportunity of negotiation should be given to them, which does not necessarily have to result in a creation of an independent state. I repeat and reiterate the fact, I do not say a new state has to be created, but at least the intention of negotiation brings the parties to the table, tries to come forward with an amicable solution there, and at least some level of autonomy is given within the existing state structure. So this is what negotiated self-determination is, not something that is vehemently discussed in material literature, and it is something that I wish to pursue further ahead as part of my research widening thought process. Now, when I initially brought this topic for my PhD and when I was discussing, when I had my interview, it was not in this form. I originally had a thought process saying it was a preferential right. I was trying to make an argument that if any group of people want to become independent, self-determination has to give them that chance to create it. That is, without any restriction, without any kind of qualification, I was advocating for self-determination should be uniformly given. And I remember at my interview, BK sir, Mini ma'am, Anil sir, they all were questioning how can that be happening and how can this this argument work. And I was focusing on the Scottish referendum. And Anil sir had pointed out that is not a singular example that you can just point out and say this is something that can happen. So I thought to myself, I kept working on it. And luckily I was able to go to Aberdeen as a visiting scholar. And I got a different perspective on this chapter. So I had a lot of discussions there, a lot of materials. I realized that rather than focus on that preferential angle or that remedial angle, negotiation or dispute resolution mechanisms that we generally advocate now, negotiation was a key way or a primary way by which we can resolve most of the conflicts that are still there. I'm not saying that every conflict will eventually come to a solution as it is, but negotiation goes a long way when autonomy is on the table. See, the problem is people have a misconception that self-determination necessarily only leads to a creation of new state. That is, territorial integrity has to be violated. A state has to give away its territory. That is not a fact. There have been instances when autonomy is further given, certain other arrangements are given to satisfy the people, and even if that doesn't work, maybe at a certain point of time, consensual secession is permissible. Consensual secession meaning two parties coming together, agreeing to certain terms and conditions, seceding amicably. So what was happening in Scotland was a clear example of consensual secession, where the United Kingdom gave an opportunity to Scotland to decide, okay, come, you vote, you decide. When I was there was a talk saying that they actually gave this offer because they knew the referendum would fail. If they had known it would be successful, they wouldn't have given. But that is all just speculating. But the point being, the fact that they had given the opportunity to them to vote and they voted. But unfortunately, according to them, I'm not sure, but they had voted not to leave United Kingdom. They had decided not to leave United Kingdom. But now there's another approach. The Scottish National Party is trying to bring about another referendum because the United Kingdom voted to remove itself from the European Union. Now that was not a decision that Scotland was happy about. Now Scotland is trying to push for another referendum, which of my opinion is not something that can be given. So then there will be unending referendums for each decision made by a state. So that is not practical. They had a chance, they decided not to. But this has definitely opened the option for states to negotiate. Now after the discussion, I started looking for other case studies where negotiation might have happened. And interestingly, I came across many. There were many aspects of negotiation involved in various other independence struggles. Independence of Norway from Sweden, they were, as per the Act of Union, they were together. At a point of time, they realized they did no longer want to be together. They negotiated and split. Malaysia and Singapore, interesting, they were a federation together. They were not happy together. Malaysia, but the constitution of Malaysia had given a provision to make an amendment. An amendment was made for Singapore to secede and become an independent state, which happened all amicably. But the difference is in Malaysia and Singapore, there was a lot of bloodshed prior to the amendment. But after the amendment, everything is well and good. Now they continue to have a very amicable relation. There is no problem. Dissolution of Czechoslovakia. After the dissolution of Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia realized that it's not point in they being together. Czech Republic and Slovakia had to form, and they negotiated and they became split. The examples that I've already discussed, Eritrea. Eritrea is actually, when you think about it, the Eritrean army, Liberation Army, had fought with the rebel group in Ethiopia, and they succeed in toppling the government in Ethiopia and negotiated their terms of independence with Ethiopia voluntarily. So there was a negotiation process involved. The United Nations mission was also involved. Similarly, there are other examples. Quebec is an important reference. Now, Quebeconians are a group of people in Canada. They conducted a referendum which actually failed. The people decided they don't want to leave Canada. But nonetheless, there was reference made to the Canadian Supreme Court with respect to the legality of the referendum which happened in Quebec, and that judgment of the Supreme Court of Canada is considered to be one of the most important judgments as regards to self-determination, because it talks about the Islands case, it talks about remedial right to secession, it talks about negotiation. My primary, this argument of negotiation, there is a lot of discussion about that. That is, if a group of people, overwhelming outcome is that they want to become independent, they need not be given independence, but at least given a chance to come forward and negotiate. At least give them an opportunity to be heard, opportunity to form some kind of an arrangement where they'll be happy. This was something that was discussed in Quebec case. So Quebec case I've discussed in chapter 6. during my pre-submission, there were a lot of questions from different quarters, and I've addressed those questions. One primary question that I got from B.K. Balashar sir was that if you say the right to self-determination is something to be negotiated, how can you call it a right? That was a very, I wasn't expecting that question at that point, but I answered it in the best way possible. So I went back, I looked about it, and jurisprudentially speaking, I did get a lot of arguments in favor of negotiating a right. There are environmental rights with respect to sustainable development, where it has to be balanced, where environmental rights are there, and sustainable development should also be considered. So I have to put a subtopic just focusing on how, though a right, even though it's negotiated, still considered as a right. I've included that in my chapter. From the pre-submission, there was another important suggestion from my pre-submission with respect to defining self-determination, self-liberation from Sandeep sir. How do you distinguish between each and how it is? I've included that in the second and third chapters. Now, Palestine crisis is another issue that I've just discussed, because there's an ongoing crisis where this concept of negotiation can be employed to resolve it, which is not an easy thing, but definitely something that has to be considered. Scottish struggle, as I explained just now. These are all important examples with respect to consensual secession and negotiating the right to self-determination. These are all different points of time where this has happened. Montenegro. So when Yugoslavia had separated, Montenegro and Serbia had become a rump state and wanted to claim itself as a successor state to the Yugoslavia. But they realized they couldn't. And after a point of time, they decided to become independent, and they conducted they actually unilaterally decided to become independent. Montenegro separated, and Serbia was okay with that. So these are things that has been happening in the world, and these are things that we most often overlook. So I wouldn't say that negotiating a right to self-determination or consensually seceding is something I conjured. It is something that is there. It is something that it has happened. But how to formulate it in a way that is acceptable to everybody, is acceptable to the world community, that is where my final conclusion comes to. And that being said, I'll just quickly go to my hypothesis and conclusion. Just one last point with respect to political gameplay. Now, I did mention about the fact that with respect to Chechnya, Russia has been strongly opposing Chechnyan independence. But Russia was a strong advocate for Crimean independence because they wanted Crimea. Russia is a strong opponent to all other self-determination except once its interests are aligned. Similarly, most other countries, especially when you think about East Pakistan and Tamils, similar situation, but East Pakistan, India had a vested interest. India had a crisis also because of the refugee inflow, but India had some vested interest, and India supported, many other nation states supported. Bangladesh became independent, Tamils were completely eradicated. Sudan, South Sudan became an independent state, but now recently, day before yesterday, I read an article where the state missionary in South Sudan is actually failing. It's again going back to a very detrimental state. So South Sudan, I wouldn't say it's a success story, but Somaliland, it's a successful state on paper, but still nobody is even considering recognizing it. So this begs the question, how, on what basis states are gauged, or on what basis each claims of self-determination are basically decided. So the political gameplay angle is definitely there, and that is also why this topic was of interest to me. That's how it generated an interest. So I've discussed all this in my 5th and 6th chapter, and the final hypothesis that I had put forward in my conclusion is that, first one being that the right to self-determination is not an absolute right to the people outside the colonial context, and the modern day application is limited by various factors, and each claim is decided on a case-to-case basis. I agree to the fact that on outside the colonial context, it's not an absolute right. If you are a colonial territory, yes, you have the right. But if you are not, it is always, in the modern day application, it's always decided on a case-to-case basis. Interestingly, West Sahara, if you've heard about West Sahara was a colonial territory. When West Sahara was decolonized, Mauritania and Morocco had invaded West Sahara and took control over the territory. They tried to conduct a referendum, nothing happened, and subsequently Mauritania had withdrawn and Morocco had seized control. But there is a group of people in Western Sahara which are called as Polisario Front, who have claimed They are the ones who are having the right over the territory. But even now, though it was originally a colonial territory, it's still not an independent state. The decolonization per se have not happened. It's categorized under non-self-governing territory. So that is hypothesis 1. Hypothesis 2 being, rather than deny the right altogether, claims for self-determination, if overwhelming, has to lead to a possible negotiation that could primarily promote internal means of redressal or external option as a last resort with the consent of the parent. This is my point. If there is an overwhelming group of people saying that we want to be independent and they conduct a referendum, they voice this opinion in some form or the other, at least that should be evidence enough to start a negotiation, which could lead to an autonomy or some other form, necessarily not secession. And if there is no other recourse, secession or consensual secession can be considered. I have included timeline charts and conclusion, suggestions and recommendations that I have made with respect to the entire chapters that I have had. Looking forward, United Nations definitely have a more important role to play. United Nations have to establish some kind of framework to decide on this lack of uniformity. Rather than have this lack of uniformity when an application is made with respect to how a group of people trying to claim independence, there has to be a process. They can establish a body, they can lay down some, International Law Commission can lay down some draft articles with respect to how to go about considering self-determination claims. So if at all, one suggestion that I could put forward is to establish a mechanism where, like the ICJ, so International Court of Justice, if there is a dispute, you put an application, people consent to the forum, jurisdiction of the ICJ, and then the decision is binding. Similarly, an application can be made to the parties, and parties can come to negotiate in this forum and try to come to a solution which was agreeable to all parties. Might not result in a remedy immediately, but it can eventually lead to, at least it would result in a lot of less bloodshed. So comprehensive system needs to be established. Remedial secession as a last resort is definitely considered as a right because of the examples of Kosovo and various other examples where United Nations have definitely played a vital role. Request the International Law Commissions to further study on self-determination and on the aspect of establishing this mechanism. Mediation and conflict resolution, that is what I said, dispute resolution mechanism. Negotiation is definitely the way forward, and in this century as years go by, the concept of state is further evolving. Though the traditional concepts will still persist, the concept of state is further evolving. So mediation and negotiation is definitely in the important tool that can be used. Nations have a vital role to play. They can definitely contribute towards settlement of various claims of self-determination, reduce tensions, human rights violations. So a lot of suggestions I have included in the 6th chapter, and also included future research prospects to this topic, specifically focusing on chapter 6. That is, if given an opportunity, I would love to work further on this negotiation as a concept. I propose to draft a convention on self-determination to give member states an opportunity or an avenue to work out a solution to claims or legitimate claims. I emphasize the word legitimate as the important keyword, and legitimate claims of self-determination, a mechanism to do that. So that is definitely a future research that I wish to focus on. Do a comparative research on various, I was not able to discuss all the case studies, but at least some major important case studies I was able to at least touch upon. But one question that I got from my pre-submission, which I necessarily could not answer completely, was, did you find anything common in all the conflicts? So there wasn't anything specifically common apart from the bloodshed. Apart from the bloodshed, there was no specific commonality as regards to the background or the cultural difference or ethnic concepts and all that. But then again, I would like to research more and try to find about, there must be something common. There is at least some kind of element is there, and that is something that I have left open for future research and globalization, impact of organizations, that can be definitely studied. So on a future scale, I definitely given some opportunity to further develop on this concept, and given an opportunity, I would be thrilled to work more on this. And with this, I just conclude and I say that self-determination is definitely a vital principle in international law. United Nations have a huge role to play in furthering, and this right is not going anywhere. It is still there. Nobody is going to take it away. So since that is a fact, we need to find a solution to applying it in the current context. Now I open the floor for questions. Thank you, sir.
Two clarifications in our doubts. First thing, whether you consider that negotiation can be right. First. Second thing, whether referendum consider as a, whether referendum also right to go for referendum. And third thing, whether Mother's Day or the Parents' Day has to accept, or how far this would be, how far the parents can claim that approval must be granted, or that is one. That's another point. And that another thing. What is the parameter to measure the human rights violation in order to grant session?
I think you're asking for everybody, many questions. Primary questions I felt that needs to be addressed, which I might have overlooked, is one question was whether what do I feel regarding negotiation. I definitely strongly advocate for that. But how do you gauge, how do you consider, on what basis a referendum is given, how do you consider a referendum requires to be a solution. Referendum is not the only way to gauge. I accept to that. Referendum is not the only way. Elections is one other way where a party advocating, one in Scottish example, the Scottish National Party was the party advocating for secession, independence. And Scottish National Party from the beginning had one agenda, and the people voted them to power because of that agenda. So election is another means. So different methods can be adopted to identify what is the wish of the people. Now how do you gauge, or how do you decide the level of human rights violations? That is also something that has to be decided on a case-to-case basis, because one, I remember I had a discussion with Sandeep sir about terrorism and self-determination and all these. He was of the opinion, he was telling me that there's no clear word definition for terrorism in international law. There's a reason. So one man's terrorism might be some other person's liberation. So you cannot say that any struggle or something that is fighting is all terrorism. Something would be legitimate. So how do you gauge, how do you differentiate between what is a legitimate revolt or revolution, or what is a terroristic activity? How do you gauge? So that is why international law does not per se define terrorism as it is. So human rights violations, how do you verify? How do you gauge this? How do you measure it? There is no hard and fast rule. But the fact that the amount of time that has passed with respect to not getting a solution, the number of deaths, the nature of which the people are being governed, access to justice is a very important important gauge. Denial of opportunity to represent or be part of the governance, these are all basic rights that community has to be given. So there are various factors that when you consider, but overall saying human right violations definitely something that has to be, there could be a guideline. There can be ABCD guidelines set forth by United Nations, and the International Law Commission can definitely propose certain guidelines to resolve this lack of consistency. I think I answered your questions with these answers. Is that fine? Okay, anybody else? Thank you, Syed, for the question.
Then the primary crux of your definition is giving an opportunity to be heard for somebody who is in distress. However, when we give this option, firstly it's an onerous task that is being taken up by the state. If they believe that they want to give an option, they do give an option. And we see that international tribunals take years and years to do. When they give this opportunity once, they hear them out. And when you are not given anything for many years, this again, what do you think, would take this types of action? What do you think that they would be further distressed because now at the international level, they are allowed?
I think you're asking from an individual point of view or from a group point of view? Group point of view, okay. In chapter 3, I defined people. Now, the definition of people is very important, because who are the people? Who are the self in the self-determination? Who is entitled to the right to self-determination? So what you just stated, asked me the question with respect to how do you identify these people and how do you address their issues particularly. You cannot always give a right to the right to self-determination is not something that will be given to individuals. It's given to groups. If you give minorities within a community a right to self-determination, it would lead to distress, continuous distress, and if it is left completely unqualified without any restriction, it will lead to fragmentation of society. So states, as we know today, would no longer exist. So it's not about identifying minorities and giving them the rights. So indigenous people in 2017, there's a UN convention which actually protects the rights of indigenous people. They are recognized to have the right to self-determination. Now identifying the group first and foremost is very important, whether they have a collective conscience, whether a collective cultural, religious commonality, and those factors first come into play. Once that is decided, opportunity to justice is not the solution, but opportunity to voice their opinion, to accept their opinion, and to consider a possible outcome. That is what I am suggesting. I do not say that something has to go on without any redress or solution and mere negotiation keeps on acting. No, not necessarily. If after a point of time it is not working out, they definitely have recourse to the traditional means of remedial right to secession and traditional concepts of warfare that it's happening now. But negotiation being the first line of defense should be advocated furthermore. That is the point that I was trying to make. Thank you for the question.
The outset, let me tell you, Advocate Vishnu, your talk has been wonderful, lovely exposition of all that is happening all around the world. You took us through the globe the last 1 hour. My question is, two parts basically. You spoke about the self-determination and also about negotiating the right. Would that sit well with the fathers of the original proponents of self-determination? Spoke about Woodrow Wilson and Lenin. Would this concept that we are speaking about today sit well with them? And second, part two to the question is, I'm sure studied all about and NATO and all of that. If you were to look into a crystal glass, do you see a World War III happening anytime in the next?
Very, very interesting question, very important question also. Now, looking back from the original thinkers, the people who advocated for the political concept of self-determination, they would not have envisioned a concept of negotiation at that point of time. But interestingly, if you look at the American Declaration of Independence in 1775 it came about, there is actually a wording which says that if a government becomes destructive, it is the right of the people to abolish or alter it and institute a new government. Even back then, this aspect of abolishing or fighting against alien rule or subjugation is always there. So, taking away an existing government and establishing a new government which is acceptable was something that's been always there. Now, I wouldn't say elements of negotiation was always there in the thought process of the original thinkers. But I will not say that it is not something they wouldn't consider. If at all, the primary objective if they had was to implement this right, to give redress to the people, to give people the chance to voice their opinion. This gives them that option. Negotiation definitely gives them that option. The current system does not give it. So negotiation is definitely something they would consider. I don't think they've also thought about. That's why there's a research gap in the current context also. So in the 21st century, I believe that maybe the current thinkers can further develop on this aspect in this century. And the second question with respect to a possibility of a third world war. It would be immature of me if I say that there would, but things are going in a way that is not right, if I may say, because though there is no explicit war, the tensions are there, especially in light of the Ukraine war and the NATO expansion scheme of the US. Tensions are there, and India's stand with respect to standing with the US and Russia opposing it, and China and Pakistan all around us. Interestingly, China, Pakistan, Russia are all in one block, and India is with America. And if at all a war is declared, we would be the first ones in between the major war. That's actually a dangerous thought if you ever think about it. I would genuinely feel that this would not. I genuinely wish that this would not lead to something as chaotic as a third world war. But I definitely feel this tension is not going to reduce anytime soon, and there will be escalations. But if at all a third world war happens, you know what's going to happen next. Then it's all game zero. So I'm not making any comments as to whether there would be a third war, but as things stand, I'm not. I'm saying it's not going on the right track. So I think I've answered your question. Yes. Thank you for that question also.
We have some questions here from these questions. The number one question is, what is the role of major powers in the world self-determination? And then the second one is, do you feel the concept of self-determination has resulted in increase of terrorist activities in the world?
Yes. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So, the major powers, that is where I did focus on the geopolitical angle. So, America being one of the superpowers have a huge role to play in most of the claims of self-determination. Their stand on how they go about recognizing, especially when America recognizes, Russia doesn't recognize, then it's a state of flux. The one primary example I can give is Taiwan. So, Taiwan, originally when China, the People's Republic of China, which is being currently governed by the Republic of China, who were the predecessing government there, exiled to Taiwan and established a de jure government there. They had tried to establish state that they are China. They want to accede to the membership of China in the UN, and there were a lot of opposition. The People's Republic of China fought, and eventually People's Republic of China won. And Taiwan realized that they no longer can claim to be China, but they decided we'll declare as an independent new state because of years of integration through with the native Taiwanese people. They have now an independent community, having an independent status, independent territory, population, everything. But there is no recognition because of the fact that China strongly opposes to Taiwan. The reason being, China is of the opinion that Taiwan is part of China, and that giving one state another entity and autonomous status would be detrimental to them. But contrastingly, within China itself, there are two provinces which is autonomous. One is Hong Kong and the other is Macau. They are actually they are not under the traditional Chinese government. They are actually given a slightly different status from that of China. So Taiwan being recognized in a similar way is actually not something that is unthinkable. But some reason or the other, China is very vehemently opposed. But the US is interested. US through its actions have always supported and tried to advocate for Taiwanese independence and recognition. So the major roles have a huge role to play, and it is based on their whims and fancies that this is completely in a state of chaos. In order to avoid this, that is why I suggested an independent mechanism or an independent body examining legitimate claims, examining and coming about a determination on legitimate claims, and laying down certain guidelines to be followed. I think that is one answer to that question about major powers. And the second question being with respect terrorist, yes, that is another interesting definition. Also plays one person's terrorist, another person's liberation. It's very difficult if you say that terrorism, it's two different concepts altogether. Now, exercising one's right to self-determination involves a right to express their economic, social, and cultural freedom. It basically depends on their ethnicity, depends on their cultural significance, their territory. So many factors come into play. Now, most of the aggressive aspects of fighting where terrorist activities are propagated, LTTE, the Tamil question, that is, the way they conducted themselves was of terrorist nature. That is why they were considered as a terrorist organization by most nations. And that must be the reason why they were eradicated altogether. So there is a fine line, but two different distinctions. Basically, the approach you take towards claiming your right to self-determination, right to independence. So I think that is how we can differentiate between them.
Resulted in weakening small states.
Yes, sir. Bigger in? Weaker in small states. The smaller the state, the less relevance you have. The bigger the state, the bigger impact you have, because there are so many factors that also come into play. The economic structuring, the trade, especially with respect to trade. Inter-regional politics play a vital role. If you look at Kurds in the northern part of Iraq, now the Kurdish independence in 2007 was vehemently opposed by Turkey, Syria, as well as Iraq. But Israel is of the opinion that the Kurdish people can be recognized because regionally they are not sharing any border with Kurds. So regional politics play a vital role. So in Africa also, Eritrea and Somaliland and South Sudan, it's all in within, but different regions have different outcomes. So smaller the territory, yes, less options they have, less recognition they get. Definitely, I concede to that, sir. Accept to that argument.
Yes, that is, you have violated excessively on the negotiation as a remedy, correct? And other than this, do you suggest any
alternative? As the two iterations that we've already discussed about the colonial and the remedial, now that we've reached a negotiation aspect, apart from a negotiation accept, the only remedy then there is autonomy. That's something we'll have to further look into, sir, because If negotiation fails, what is the next remedy? That is the next something we will have. Then the only remedy that they have is to go for remedial right and then try to enforce it again, and it's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. But if there is any other alternate mechanism or alternate solution that can be incorporated, something that we can only see, as things stand, there is nothing. As things stand, as this current law situation is, there is no solution. This is the best solution that we have. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I request the chairman of the Board of Open Defense and YOC for his comments.
Respected Professor Sunny sir, Professor Mini Madam, all my colleagues, research scholars, family members of Mr. Vishnu Nair, and all my friends, those who are present here in the open Viva. Indeed, it's my pleasure to participate in this after evaluating the thesis, to hear from horse's mouth about his research, the quality of research. And initially I thought it is difficult task for me to evaluate this because I found it is too voluminous, and around 800 page it is. And recently I received one more thesis which is of 150 pages. But Vishnu has presented a bulky document here before us to, it's a challenge for us to evaluate. Anyhow, he has done a wonderful job. Since it is a case study, perhaps it is resulted in increase of number of papers. And yes, nonetheless, the chapter 3rd, 4th and 5th is devoted exclusively for case study methods. And he has advocated the modern theories like nationalist theory, democratic theory, human rights theory, decolonization theory and pragmatic theory. These are all the theories from the theoretical perspective he has mentioned, and it has increased the value of his research. And what impresses me a lot here is review of literature. He has taken nearly 1,000 books and articles to review. That clearly indicates the in-depth of this particular study, because the collection of resource is also very important, particularly in a doctrinal research. Then he has collected voluminous information and he has taken wherever valued points are there, and he has not taken it only because it is written by somebody in their book or etc., but after evaluating it, he has taken whatever good is there in it, for which I congratulate you, Vishnu. And then another important aspect impresses me a lot is the way in which he has taken the instances for his case study. He has taken it from different parts of the world. He has not given any weightage to a particular region, but he has taken it from Europe, Asia, Africa, and all the countries are equally given importance. As he rightly pointed out, I am also of the same opinion that the Canadian Supreme Court opinion on the Quebec issue is really a guiding principle for self-determination. He has given right weightage to the right opinion expressed by the court in this respect. Then his conclusion is also very impressive, though he has given what we have already mentioned in our report, that negotiation as only remedy. But if the negotiation was considered as the sole remedy, the problem would not have been arised. I mean, in some other parts of the country I am talking, in the world I am talking. Then in such circumstances, we need to focus on some other alternatives, for which he only given an idea then how to go about in future, because he has identified some of the research problem for the research scholars to take up that particular issue, for which I congratulate both the guide, Professor Mini Madam, and also the research scholar, Shri Vishnu Nair. And at last, it is my privilege, with the permission of the board members to recommend it to the university to consider his thesis for doctoral degree. Dr. Mr. Vishnu Nair is going to be Dr. Vishnu Nair once the notification is been issued by the university, and he will also receive that certificate in the coming convocation, perhaps in the as per the university rules. With this, I congratulate both guide, Professor Mini Madam, and also Vishnu Nair, and you have done a wonderful job.
Thank you, sir.
And it is one of the best resource. That's why both the evaluators, we have recommended for publication from the university side. In case if possible, you can add something, you can condense it and hand over it to the university for publication. It is going to be one of the best resource for the future research scholars, and also it is one of the wonderful book for students, academics and research scholars. It is to the credit of NUALS to have such a research scholar in their midst, and also it is a credit to your guide to guiding for the successful completion of the PhD on a very important topic in the international arena. Once again, I congratulate Professor Mini and also Dr. Vishnu Nair.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It fills me with great pride to hear these words, and it's a very emotional scenario. I'm very proud. Mini ma'am, I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. It wouldn't have been possible without my guide, and you were definitely the person. She was always behind me. You can do it, Vishnu. You can finish it within the time. Constant motivator. She was very instrumental. And everybody, all the teachers here, Anil sir, BK sir, Sandeep sir, Amli ma'am, all the teachers here, were the environment that was created and was by research scholars, by wonderful research scholars who are here with me. I have no words to say. They have come all the way. Some of them are part-time now, but they have still come. I'm very happy that I had an environment, a very positive environment, which helped me achieve this, finish this within the time frame. Sunny sir, I have no words to express. He's always been there with me from the day I decided to take up law as a career. He's always been the inspiration, the guide, and sir's support is something I cannot put to words. And sir, being here today itself is testament to that. And Walson sir is here, the admin block here, Asha ma'am, Shalini ma'am, everybody supportive, or the staff here, everybody. It was a collective effort, I would say. Everybody, the research scholars, and my family used to come all the way. My grandmother, my grandmother's brother, sister, everybody has taken the effort to be part of this special day. My grandmother, I always say, she's like a mother to me also. So I'm very happy that she was able to make the trip. Initially, I thought of health issues, she might not be able to, but she came. My parents, my father and mother. I am the third generation doctoral person, so I am very proud of that aspect. My grandfather being the first one in the Kerala University, and my mother following in his footsteps, and me in third. My sister, who could not be here, but she is the go-to person of my life, and she is there in Manchester. I know her, my brother-in-law, and the kids. They're all constant support. Ayush, Leah, Vian, and Yuvan, they're all there. And my beautiful wife, she's carrying you. She does not have a big tummy. She's actually carrying. She's 8 months pregnant, and still she wanted to be here. And she took the effort. We were all skeptical whether she could come by train, but she came. She took part, and she has been there, as many have said. I say, get ready. She's even before that ready, and we are already there. We've traveled all over the places collecting materials to Delhi, Bangalore, Aberdeen, and Aberdeen particularly. Professor Zare was one turning point in my research, one opportunity there. Indian Law Institute, Manoj Kumar sir was another very important, and so many different peoples I have to thank for, and it wouldn't end with, even it might go beyond my open defense itself. Arjun, who's come all the way from Trivandrum to be part of my presentation, a very good friend and advocate of mine. Arun sir, finance officer, people in the office who have come to be part of this. Thank you, sir. Mahadevan sir was here for a long time. The students, the LLB students who have also joined. My school friends have also come. Arun and Manoj has come. Thank you all. I have no other words to say but to give you my sincere gratitude, and I'll definitely see you all with a big treat after all this is over. And I'm not going to delay it any further. We have a wonderful lunch planned for you all. Yes, and the LLM students who are on the other block, who are sitting in the smart classroom, thank you so much guys for being there. Thank you for being there, and I'll definitely answer your questions if you have any while we see you after this. So that is there, and with that I'll just conclude. So everybody, please have lunch, be part of this wonderful process, and thank you to NUALS and thank you to the teachers, specifically the teachers, Mini Ma'am and everybody. Thank you so much. No more words. So I conclude. Akshay and Syed, special words to you. You were the constant support. They were there with me throughout. Always there's, yeah. One thing is that they're like always saying, Vishnu bro is super, Vishnu bro is super. They keep saying that. I say stop it. But in my heart I feel okay that they're saying Vishnu bro is super. That means I must be some super. So their constant encouragement is always there. So if I've left out anybody, please don't mistake it. But I have everybody in my heart. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody. I conclude.